This video is sponsored by GPD Host. They offer a variety of affordable hosting plans with flexible billing cycles. These plans include a free SSL certificate, a free domain name, website builder, and many other services, including free website migration with no downtime. To find out more, visit gpdhost.com or click the link in the description below. Hey, what's going on, guys? So I have a little Sunday project for you. We're going to build a vanilla JavaScript image gallery slider with thumbnails. All right, so basically we have a large image here, and then down here we have some thumbnails. We're using grid CSS to line them up, and you can see that whatever's selected has the opacity effect. If I click another image, it'll fade in, and we're going to use a tiny bit of CSS for that effect. All right, now 90% of the examples you're going to find on the internet for something like this are going to use jQuery, and it's really unfortunate because we don't need jQuery for most things that it's used for, in my opinion. I think that it really prevented a lot of people, not so much now because people are really catching on that that's not the way to do it, but a few years ago, it really prevented people from learning actual JavaScript. So I would have people on more than one occasion ask me if they should learn jQuery or JavaScript first, which is a little nuts. You shouldn't learn the library of a language before knowing at least the basics of the actual language. So I'm going to show you how to build it in vanilla JavaScript. Now, the other 10% of tutorials online that use vanilla JavaScript are just, I wouldn't say bad code, I'd just say less efficient than it could be. One of the examples is W3 Schools, which I think is a great site for learning. It actually taught me a lot about JavaScript, CSS, HTML, but I think they really need to update some of their code, or at least add new examples that use more modern JavaScript. There's no reason to use all the images here and all of them here. Just have a single image where you can change the source attribute when you click on one of the thumbnails. There's also no reason for these multiple functions. They should use query selector instead of get class name. That way you can use a higher order array like forEach, array method I should say, like forEach instead of these for loops. And you can just make this a lot shorter and a lot cleaner. So that's what I want to do, and I don't mean to pick apart the code here. I don't like people that really dissect other people's code and just trash it, and that's not what I'm doing. This is actually very fundamental stuff like learning variables and for loops, and I do think you should learn selectors like get elements by class name. Even though this stuff is older, I think you should still learn it, but I also think they should put a newer version as well. All right, so but then again, that takes the job away from me. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to build this in a more efficient way than this version here, and also add the fade effect. This doesn't have the fade effect. I actually boiled it down to 2 lines of code to build this without the fade effect and without the opacity here. So I'm going to show you that as well, using ES6 arrow functions, things like that. All right, so let's jump into it, guys. No more negativity. I don't mean to trash jQuery or W3 Schools. I'm just trying to give you an idea of why I made this video. All right, so let's jump in. All right, so to get set up here, if you're going to follow along and you want these exact images, you can go to pexels.com, which is a great free stock photo site, and just search for the word tech, and that's pretty much where I got, well, that is where I got all of these images. And if you want to grab the same exact size, you want the large, which is the 1920 by 1280, in this case 1279, but that's fine. All right, so inside here in my VS Code, you can see I have a folder called Thumb Gallery, and inside the IMG folder, I labeled the images IMG 1 through 8, okay? And then I just have a blank index.html, main.js, and style CSS. So if you want to follow along, just go ahead and get that set up. All right, so we're going to start off with the HTML as usual. So let's throw in our emit exclamation and then hit tab, and we get our head and body tags. So in here, I'm just going to say thumb gallery, and then let's add our CSS. So we're going to add style.css. I still spelled it wrong. All right, and let's add in our main.js down here. So we'll say script source, and it's going to be main.js. All right, so we have our files linked. Now for the markup, it's going to be very simple. I'm going to make it much neater than the W3C, which is this here. Pretty ugly looking. And I don't mean to sound like demeaning or anything like that. I'm just trying to show you guys a better way to do this. So let's create a container, and let's create a class of main-img, and then in here we'll create an image tag. I'm going to give this an ID of current, and we're going to set the source to the first image. So it's an img, and then it's img1.jpg. All right, we don't need the alt. Okay, and then what we'll do is go under the main image div and create a class called images, or imgs. And then what I'll do is grab this, and let's paste that in, but let's get rid of the ID of current. You don't need that. You just want the image. And then we're going to just copy this down. So we'll go ahead and just put in 8 of these. So that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then let's just change the image name. So that'll be 8, 7, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, and that's it. That's our HTML. So you can see that that is pretty neat compared to this here and this. I don't know why they did this with the multiple images at the top. What we're going to do is just change the source through JavaScript of this one image tag. All right, so let's open this up. You can go ahead and open up the HTML file, or if you're using VS Code and you want to install Live Server, you can do that, and then you can just open with Live Server. All right, so this is what it'll look like. It'll just be all the images. The first one's going to repeat because that's the main image here, and we have it in the list here. All right, so let's move on to the CSS, which is also going to be very simple. We're going to start off with the body tag. All right, so the body, I'm just going to add a margin of 20 pixels, and we're going to add padding of 0. I'm also using Prettier, which is a great VS Code extension. If I save, it'll go ahead and format my code, whether it's CSS or JavaScript, HTML. If I leave off a semicolon by accident and I save, it puts it right there. You see it move the bracket up as well. Highly recommend it. So let's see, background, we're going to set to dark gray. All right, so the container, which goes around everything, I'm going to set a max width of 760 pixels, and you can change some of this stuff if you want. And let's add a margin auto to move it to the middle. I'm going to give it a border of white, solid, and what do we want? 3 pixels. And then the background of the container will also be white. All right, save that. So here we're going to do the main image. Okay, so the image inside of that class, and I just want to set that to a width of 100% of its container. So you can see that now it fits inside of its container, which is 760 pixels. We also want the images to be with 100%. So let's go ahead and say class images image, set that to 100% as well. Okay, now the images class is actually going to be a grid. So we're going to add in .images, and we're going to set the display to grid. All right, just doing that's not going to change anything. We need to add our template columns. So let's say grid template columns, and I do have a crash course on grid CSS if you're interested. What I want to do here is have four images per column. So to do that, we could do one fractional 4 times, so 1 FR like that. So we could do that and save, but there's a shorter way we could do this, and that's by using repeat. So we could say repeat 4 times 1 fractional, like that. All right, and that'll give us the same result. Now to add some spacing in between these images, we can add a grid gap. I love grid CSS. It is fantastic. So we could set this to, let's say, 5 pixels. And save, and there we go. All right, I think Grid CSS is one of the just best technologies to come out in the last decade. It's just makes things so much easier instead of doing floats and clearing them and all that crap. So that's it for the CSS. We will add a fade-in class later with a little bit of animation for the opacity, for the fade-in, but we're going to do that later. So now we're going to jump into the main.js, and from here we're going to grab the current image. So we'll set that to document dot, we'll use query selector, and that has an ID of current. Okay, and then we want to grab all the images. Now, since there's more than one, we're going to be using query selector all. All right, and what we'll do here is it's basically like using jQuery as far as selectors go. Let's say dot images class and then all the images inside. So now what we want to do is we want to add an event listener on each of these images. Now, query selector all returns what's called a node list, which is basically like an array. It works like an array. So we actually need to loop through these images and then add the event listener onto each image. So since since query selector all returns a node list, we can actually use the higher order method of forEach instead of using just a for loop. So we can do, actually that should be images. So we can do images.forEach. And in here, we could do a callback function like that, but I'm going to go ahead and use an ES6 arrow function. So we're going to say image, and we're going to set this to image.addEventListener. And then in here, we want to listen for a click. Okay, and then the second parameter, we could put an arrow function as well. And I'm going to show you a really short way to do this. We could just say current, which is our variable for the main image, the current image. We're going to set that source attribute. We're going to set that equal to, and this should have an event passed into it. We're going to set it equal to that event.target.source. Okay, so just this should actually give us the thumbnail functionality. So I'm going to save, and now we'll go over here and we can actually change the images. All right, now you'll see that prettier, I'm using the prettier extension for VS Code, which formats on save, but this could actually be one line of code. If I were to make this bigger, so it could be one line of code, right? And then if we wanted to, we could also use ES6 destructuring for our variables. So we could say const, and then inside of some brackets, and I'm not going to leave it like this, I'm just doing it to show you guys how short we can make this. So we could say current and images equals, set that to brackets, and then we could take this, put that in there, take this, and put a comma here, put that in there, and go ahead and get rid of that. And now we have two lines of code. Okay, when I save it, it goes to this because it auto formats, but you saw that it could be two lines of code and it still works. Okay, I'm not going to use destructuring though, I just wanted to show you guys that real quick. All right, so we're going to go back to this, and let's just make this smaller again. And instead of just pointing using our arrow function here, I'm going to create a new function. So we're going to replace this with a function called image click. Okay, and then we'll create that function here. So img click, and that can take in an event parameter. And then we're going to do the same thing we just did. We're going to take the current source and we're going to set it to e.target.source. Okay, and that should still work. Let's go ahead and test it, and there we go. All right, so let's take care of the opacity. When I click on an image, I want it to be kind of faded out. So up here, I'm going to set a variable for the opacity, and I'm going to set it to 0.4 by default. All right, and then we'll go down here, and after we change the source, actually let me just put some comments in here. We'll say change current image to source of clicked image, and then we want to change the opacity to whatever the variable is, to var. We'll say opacity var. So to do that, we take the e.target, and we want to take the style and the opacity and set it equal to whatever that opacity is. So let's save that, and now if I click on the computer image, you'll see that now it's lighter. Now the problem we have is if I click on another image, that opacity changes, but the computer is still left like that, and it's just, they're all going to stay like that. So what we're going to do is at the beginning of our image click, we want to reset the opacity of all the images. So to do that, we're just going to take our images and we're going to forEach, and we're going to take image and we're going to set that to image.style.opacity and just set that to 1. Okay, so that will reset it on every click. So if I click that, we see the opacity. If I go to another one, it resets it. Sorry about my son yelling upstairs. It resets it, and then it sets the opacity to the level just for that single image. Okay, so that functionality is covered. Now the final thing we want to add is the animation, and you can see how neat this code is. So for the animation, we're going to go to our style CSS, and let's say fade in animation. So we're just going to create a keyframe here. So we're going to say at keyframes, and we're going to say fade in. Yeah, we'll do fade in like that. And we just want to say 2. And then we want to set the opacity to 1. Okay, and then we just want to have a class called fade in. We'll do fade dash in and set opacity to 0, and then just call that animation. So we'll say animation fade in, and we'll say 0.5 seconds, so half a second, and we'll ease in 1, and we'll say forwards. All right, and that's it. That's our CSS animation. And the forwards is the fill mode property, which it's basically going to make it so the element retains the style values that's set by the last keyframe. But that's it. That's all we need. So now what we're going to do is go back to our JavaScript, and when we click on an image, we're going to add that fading class to the current image. Okay, so let's go, let's see, we'll go right here after the source changes, and let's say add fading class. So we can do that by taking our current image and just saying class list dot add, that'll add a class, and we want to add fade in, fade dash in. So let's save that. Let's click on an image. Okay, so let's see, current class dot add fade in. Did I save this? No, I didn't. Okay, so let's just reload this and click. Now only the first one faded in. Did you see that? If I reload and I click, it fades in. Now the reason it's not working on these other ones is because the fading class has just stayed on this, and the animation is only going to happen when the class hits, when it actually gets that class, and it already has it, so it's not doing the fade in. So what I came up with as a solution was to use a set timeout and remove the class in a half a second after we click it. All right, so I mean, there's other ways you can do this. I just figured that this was a nice solution. So we'll say remove fading class after 0.5 seconds. So all we have to do is say set timeout, and that's going to take in a function. We'll use an arrow, and we're going to say current dot class list. Just like we can do add, we can do remove. And then we want to remove the fading class. So fade dash in, and then the second parameter will be the length of time. I'm going to say 500. This is in milliseconds, so 500 milliseconds is a half a second. All right, so let's try that. We'll save. So that fades in. Click the next one, and even if I do it real fast, it works. Okay. Now the last issue that I just realized I didn't do is when we first come to the application, I want the first image to have the opacity. So we can easily do that by going up to the top here and just we'll say set first image opacity, and we'll do that by saying the images, we want the first one. When we use query selector all and we get a DOM list back, we can select the images like an array, so we want the first one, and then we're just going to set the style didn't mean to do that, style dot opacity, and we'll set that equal to that opacity variable, which I'm going to make a little lighter. Let's do 6 and save, and now you can see the first one has the opacity. If I click on the next one, gets the opacity, the fade works, and everything is good. All right, so again, if we look at this JavaScript here, in my opinion at least, it's nice and clean, and it looks much better than what they did here. All right, and please don't take this as a dig at W3 Schools. It's a great site. It's one of the best for learning, at least the basics of JavaScript, HTML, CSS. But what I'm trying to do is just show you that JavaScript has evolved, and we can do things in a much cleaner and easier way. And we also don't need jQuery to do something like this. Even with fade-ins and so on, I mean, the CSS is easy enough. It's a couple lines. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time. Hey guys, I just want to mention our sponsor, GPD Host. So if you're looking for affordable, fast, and quality cPanel hosting, look no further. They offer many types of packages that include a free domain name, free SSL certificate, a website builder, and more. All hosting plans are completely managed and easy to work with. You also get automatic weekly backups. So whether you have a website to transfer or you're building it from scratch, GPD Host is a high-quality solution. To learn more, visit gpdhost.com or click the link in the description below.